Earth covered by water with a lot of volcanic activity going on, the oceans are going to be very hot, essentially, very, very warm. 3 minutes left. And so, but there's going to be a lot of volcanic ash in the air. So what happens is the atmosphere cools down a lot because the volcanic ash reflects the sunlight, as happened with, I think, Krakatoa and other volcanoes. So you have cold atmosphere and you have warm oceans. You got lots of evaporation, and then it cools and forms snow. This is where the Ice Age, I believe, the one Ice Age came about, because you had so much snow happening because of the warm oceans and the cold atmosphere. And you have lots of huge blizzards dumping lots of snow all over the place. And so you get these, what are thought to be annual layers, but I would say they're just different blizzards that came through and dumped these huge layers of snow. And then over time, they got compressed because there are actually several miles of ice down there, as Dr. Wakefield mentioned. But if you look at all these, 740,000 layers of ice, not all of them are individual years. The galaxies, let me just mention, yes, some of them seem to be very far away, but there are several ways that you could explain how we could see this light in a short amount of time, in 6,000 years. For example, relativistically, Einstein's theories, basically clocks run at different speeds depending on the gravity field and velocities. So time could be running faster for stars and galaxies far away compared to light here on Earth. Or actually one that I think is an even better explanation, there could be a differential one-way speed of light, so it's basically infinite toward the observer, and then half the speed of light away from the observer, and it's just a convention essentially, but that would let us see everything that's happening in the galaxy, even the far away things, as they're actually happening, essentially. And this is interesting because there are actually evidences showing that the galaxies are young as well, because, for example, if you look at supernovas, there should be about 3,000 supernovas because they last for about 1 million years, the remnants of them. In our own galaxy, you should see about 3,000, but we only see about 200. And that's actually about 7,000 years worth of supernova remnants. And there are many other astronomical things which we could get to, but Dante, how much time do I have left?
1 minute.
1 minute? When I look back, let me just finish up with this comment about the Bible. When you look at how Jesus interpreted Genesis, he said things like, well, have you never read? From the beginning, he made the male and female. And you try to compare that with the evolutionary explanation. To me, it seems, first of all, obvious that Jesus took Genesis as literal history, and he understood Hebrew and the culture better than we do, thousands of years later. And second, it just fits much better with the young Earth view than an old Earth view.
Thank you, Dr. Gilmour. At this time, we'd like to open it up to questions from the audience.
Thank you both for your wisdom and input. I have a question towards Dr. Gilmour. How do young Earth creationists reconcile the fossils and bones and everything that's been found with Neanderthals and really ancient humans and humanoids, and how does that fit into the young Earth creationist view of God's creation?
Right. Thanks. Great question. Basically, I view Neanderthals as some people that were around right after the flood. You may have heard of this out of Africa model, basically out of the Middle East. Where did humans come from? The flood, according to the Bible, the ark landed somewhere in the Turkey area, and then people spread out in the Middle East. So it actually does fit perfectly with this fossil evidence of where people came from. And then, like you said, there's the Neanderthals in, I believe, to Europe, and then there's some other early humans in China and in Africa. So I would disagree with the dating. I think that these would be about 4,000 years old for these bones, but they were just normal people. And actually, there is evidence showing that Neanderthals and modern humans interbred with each other. So it's really all one species. Let me turn the question around for a minute, because some people say that Neanderthals were not fully human or something, but if you try to say that there was if Neanderthals were before Adam and Eve, let's say, some people try to say that, there is evidence of very old human bones which show cannibalism and show spear marks. There's basically a lot of violence shown in those records, as well as disease, osteoporosis and other things, cancer. And so if you say that happened before Adam and Eve, and you say God thinks that's very good, that's very problematic for me. So for me, it makes perfect sense to say after Noah, the flood, Noah's Ark landed, Noah came out, and his kids started reproducing, and there were different genetic variations. Some had real thick bones, and others didn't. And so we got Neanderthals and some other groups. Thanks.
Do you want to take a minute to respond? If not,
let's just move on.
okay. Do you have a question for Wakefield?
In reference to old Earth, how would you hold on to that theory? When, like, 2 years ago, I just Googled it because I had heard the story, but I couldn't remember the details exactly. But 2 years ago in Alberta, Canada, they found a mummified dinosaur with real skin texture, skin color, and soft tissue.
Yeah, you'll have to send me a link to it because as far as I know, all the dinosaurs went extinct at the end of the KT explosion, the KT event, which was about 65 million years ago, when a giant, either a comet or an asteroid actually hit the surface of the Earth right around the Yucatan Peninsula and threw so much debris up into the air that it actually basically created a nuclear winter. And that's what ended the age of the dinosaurs about 65 million years ago. So I would have to actually, I haven't seen that article that you're mentioning. I would want to look at it, and I would want to actually check the validity of something like that. Again, there's always going to be stuff that I don't know. In fact, the more stuff that I learn, the more I know I don't know. So, yeah, send me a link, and I'll take a look at it.
Do you have a question for Gilmour?
This is a question kind of for both, but I just wanted to see what the New Earth and Old Earth views, how they interpret the Nephilim referenced in Genesis.
So Nephilim reference in Genesis is saying that there were sons of God who went in with the daughters of men, and there were Nephilim in those days. I've heard several different theories. I'm not really sure which one I think is most likely. And I could talk with you about the pros and cons of different theories. I don't think it really affects the young Earth versus old Earth question, because really the question is, when did Adam come on the scene, Adam and Eve? In my mind, that's the question. I don't think you can fit millions or billions of years between Adam and Noah and some of those others.
Yeah, I would agree with Dr. Gilmour on that position. There's been a lot of speculation, even amongst people who are Old Testament scholars, about exactly what is the purpose, what is that part of the story really trying to say. Some have said that it's angelic beings that came down and actually had relations with human women, and that's where the giants like Goliath and so forth came from. If anybody saw the Noah's Ark movie, which I never actually saw, they actually represented the Nephilim as being these rock creatures, which was pretty artistic, but I don't think that's very biblical. So, so there's lots of different ways that has been trying to be wrestled with, but again, I don't necessarily know that has much to do with old Earth, young Earth interpretation. It has much more to do, I think, with what is the scripture really trying to say at that point, and really someone who's really more of an Old Testament scholar would really be someone to sort of try and help tease that out.
So, any questions? for either Wakefield or Gilmour.
I got a question for Dr. Wakefield. You believe that the earth is billions of years old. How does that affect your interpretation of the canon of the Bible? And is the billions of years stretched out in the Bible itself, or is it before or after? Do you understand the question?
You're talking about how the Bible was actually put together?
Or like the dates in the Bible, like was there a billion years between Adam and Noah, or the length in between the events in the Bible?
Right. No. I think that the billions of years that happened actually, if you take all of the time that's been on Earth, and you actually put it on a 12-hour clock, okay. Human beings don't actually show up on that clock until like the last somewhere between 5 to 2 seconds on that time scale. So everything that we know of human history has happened in a very, very short period of time, and that includes everything from all of our written history, all of our oral history. Everything is a really relatively short period of time as far as that goes. So there are different interpretations, and in fact, there is one interpretation of how you could actually get all of these events and fossils and so forth like that before having a really young creation. It's what's called the gap theory. So the gap theory basically says that in Genesis 1, where it says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and then you go to Genesis 2, where it says, and the surface of the earth was empty and void, okay? And what has been proposed is that there's a gap of time there between those two where something is happening on the surface of the earth, but it's not actually recorded in the Bible what that is. And some have said that during that time period from when God created the heavens and earth, that's where you have everything that happens as far as dinosaurs and everything that went on. And then about 6,000 years ago, all of that got kind of wiped away. We know from the scriptures that there was, in fact, a rebellion in heaven. That's where Satan was cast down. And some have said, well, maybe that's the reason why you have all this evidence for destruction and death and so forth, is because there was this war in heaven, and that's what wiped out the surface of the earth. And then God started over again in Genesis 2 with the earth being formless and void, and then you actually have everything that comes after that. That's what's been called the gap theory. So that was kind of popular for a while. I think that's kind of fallen out of favor. Most people don't really subscribe to that idea much anymore. But at least is one way of trying to answer this idea of how can we have all this time that seems to have been on the earth and yet also be true to a young earth sort of understanding. And so I think there probably are still some people who hold on to that idea. But as far as what I understand, I think that our understanding of humanity and what we understand is just what has literally happened within a very short period of time as far as the earth itself goes.
Do we have a question for Gilmour?
Hey, how do young Earth creationists interpret the cosmic background radiation?
Yeah, great question. So the theory from the secular evolutionary side would be that, first of all, we see these red shifts, right? So as Dr. Wakefield was saying, it seems like things are moving away from each other, and that's where the light is being shifted and so on. The problem is, if you look in all directions, everything seems to be about the same temperature. And the sides of the universe that we're looking at are 13 light years away, and there's not been enough time, theoretically, for all sides of the universe to have arrived at the same temperature. This is called the horizon problem. And so to solve the horizon problem, they came up with the inflation hypothesis, which says that the universe started out very small, smaller than a pinhead, and then very quickly expanded, so during that expansion time, or before that expansion time, there was enough closeness together that everything in the universe could be equalized to the same temperature, and then it expanded, and that's why we see what we see today. Now, that inflation really doesn't have any known mechanism, and they don't know why it stopped. It's just sort of ad hoc, it's something to rescue the theory. But actually there's evidence, and they found this, like you said, Seth, they found this cosmic microwave background, which is supposedly leftover radiation from the Big Bang when it expanded. But there are some evidences against that interpretation. For example, when you look at the nearby galaxies, we should see a shadow cast by the galaxies in the cosmic microwave background, because the cosmic microwave background is coming from a long distance away, and by the time it hits the galaxies, there should be some blockage by the time it gets to us, but we don't see any shadow. So that's indicating that maybe this cosmic microwave background is not coming from the quote-unquote expansion of the universe anyway. I can send you some links. There's one called Bible Science Forum, where John Hartnett really investigates a lot of this cosmic microwave background and so on. By the way, I will plan to post some follow-up links on my Facebook page, and just sort of encourage you to keep digging and investigating. So please do keep investigating beyond what we're talking about tonight.
Do you have a question for Wakefield?
So I was having a very similar discussion about this young Earth, old Earth debate, and one of my suite mates brought up a really interesting point. He pointed to Jesus' first miracle, where he turned the water into wine. And he said the wine had properties of something that was old, even though it was very recently created. Do you think this concept could carry over into the young Earth debate?
Oh, absolutely. Could it be? Yes, absolutely. And it's one of the things that I've always held to whenever we have these discussions, and that's why I started off by saying that God is sovereign and God can do whatever He wants to do. So if God is, if in fact the earth is very young, which it very well could be, and God could have made everything look old. He's sovereign. He can do whatever He wants to. He doesn't have to answer to me. He doesn't have to answer to anybody. He's a sovereign God, so He can do whatever He wants to. So is that a possibility? Absolutely, it's a possibility. And I always take a very humble sort of position when it comes to this by saying, because I say that God can do whatever He wants to, and He doesn't have to explain Himself to anybody. So, but I do struggle with that somewhat, because I just don't feel like that, in my opinion, is in the character of God for Him to, in such a way, make things look so much like they are old, that evolution did in fact occur, when it would have been very, very easy for Him to not do that, okay, because He's sovereign. So, for example, we haven't really talked so much about the whole process of evolution and the evidences that support the idea of evolution, but there are so many ways that if God had chosen to, He could have made this an open and shut case, and this debate would have ended hundreds of years ago. But for some reason, it's not like that, and so that's why we still are having these discussions. But yeah, there's so many ways that God could have just said, okay, I'm going to do it this way, so everybody knows that this is exactly how I did it. But He didn't, and so that's why I really struggle with, why would God make it look that way if it isn't really that way, when He obviously could have, and then we could spend our time better watching more episodes of Stranger Things on Netflix. So.
Do we have a question for Gilmour? Do you have a question for Wakefield?
Okay, so whenever you responded to any of the findings where dinosaur bones had DNA in them, or there's soft tissue in a dinosaur body that was found, you've been kind of pushing that aside and saying how it might not be reliable. Now, assume for a minute that it actually is reliable and that dinosaur bones have actually been found that have DNA in them, how does this affect the old Earth theory?
That's a great question. I don't really have an answer for that. First of all, dinosaurs were a type of lizard. They're a type of reptile, and so is it possible? My question, I guess, would be: is this in fact a dinosaur? Is it in fact, or is it just another kind of reptile that is not nearly as old as a dinosaur? So that's one of the things that I would have to look at and see, and that I'm assuming other scientists are looking at to see as well. Because we still have organisms that are on the planet, reptiles that are on the planet, that are as old as dinosaurs. Okay, so like for example, there were turtles back at the time of dinosaurs. There were other kinds of reptiles that were around at the time of the dinosaurs. And obviously, they didn't go extinct. They are still around. So I would just have to, that's why I'm just saying I'm not familiar with that. So that's the main question I would ask is, are we actually looking at a real dinosaur, or are we looking at something that's a reptile of some sort? And that's where we're getting that DNA, that's where we're getting that from. Anything other than that is just hypothetical speculation. If we said, oh my gosh, this really is a dinosaur, then does that necessarily mean that old Earth is wrong? No, I don't think so. I think it could mean that this is an organism that for some reason, just like the turtles, it lasted a whole lot longer than was expected for any other dinosaurs. For a great example of that is coelacanth. The coelacanth is a kind of lobe-finned fish that for hundreds of years we thought was extinct, that they all went extinct until they started catching them off the coast of the Philippines. So, it's a very deep water fish. So, there's still a lot of things that are in the world that we still don't know, that we still haven't completely explored. There's still a lot of mysteries out there. So if in fact it is a kind of dinosaur, then I would have to assume that it's something that lived past the KT event, lived longer than it was expected, and that somehow survived just like the other organisms that survived that extinction event.
We have enough time for maybe one or two more questions.
So it's for Wakefield. How does Old Earth theory handle the whole representation of creation in a week, when like each verse specifically says that this was in day 1 and this is in day 2? How does it handle that? And why would God, say that creation happened in a week and then have Jesus come and stress that we celebrate the Sabbath and keep the Sabbath holy every week, when older theory says that, between day 1 and day 2 it could have been billions of years? Why would the Sabbath be every Sunday and not every few years or something like that? Like, how does old Earth theory handle that?
Again, this is really more of a question that's better for an Old Testament scholar than probably for me, but from what I understand is even Jesus said the Sabbath is made for man, okay? And so we as creatures who live the life that we live, we actually need that day of rest. And God set a day of rest aside as a holy day for us to rest and focus our minds and focus our thoughts on Him, that we're supposed to keep the Sabbath and keep it holy. It's a day that we're meant to put aside our work, put aside our other cares and concerns, and really focus and take that day of rest. And so what I understand from Old Testament scholars is that God wanted to establish that pattern right from the very beginning. And so that's why that's why it was recorded that it came in a week like that. You have to also ask yourself the question: why would it say on the seventh day that God rested? Was He tired? Well, obviously, no, God doesn't get tired. He's all powerful. He doesn't need rest. He doesn't have to have rest. So it's recorded in that way to actually sit down and lay down a pattern for a typical week that we as followers of God are meant to actually follow as well. That there's a Sabbath day. And then, of course, if you know anything about the history of the Israelites, there was also a Sabbath year. Okay, when everything was supposed to, at the 7th year, you were supposed to have certain things that you were supposed to return back to their original owners. And then you even had the year of Jubilee, which was the 7th year, which is the year after the 49th year. You had the year of Jubilee, where everything was supposed to go back to their original owners of everything. And this was meant, God set down these laws, or set down these edicts for the very purpose of trying to keep the people who were in Israel from having a situation where you have these people who are constantly impoverished, people who were constantly indentured servants, and it went on throughout the whole history of their family. No, that was never God's intention. It was intended that people would be able to be redeemed back. They could get back the things that they had lost. And so I think God put this down as far as a creation event to just sort of establish that pattern right from the beginning. And again, I'm not an Old Testament scholar, but one of the things that we do have to be careful about is, like I said, again, reading into things that we want to make the book say from our perspective versus what it was really meant for the people who it was originally written for. So I guess that's enough for that.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. Let's give our speakers a big thank you. I'll give it to Peyton here to close.
Thank you guys for coming. I hope that you enjoyed that and some food for thought. Of course, our Dr. Tim and Dr. Tim, they're both Tim, if you didn't notice that. If you have any follow-up questions, email them, talk to them. They love talking about this with students. All the professors in the science department do for sure. I'm sure the engineering would be willing to speak about that too. So if you didn't sign up on the sign-up sheet, please write down your name. We're not going to email you a bunch of stuff or anything. We just want to know who is here. So thank you so much for coming. Our next event is on November 16th. And yeah, that'll be Dr. Sanford, who is a geneticist. So it's really an honor for us to have him here at John Brown University. So make sure that you come for that. All right. Thank you very much for coming.
And as you leave, if you wouldn't mind just making sure that all of your edibles and dishes and stuff are cleaned up, that would be amazing. And thank the camp workers on your behalf. Thanks for coming.
Good.
Homework.
Yeah, I think everybody signed it.
Figure out why.
You wrote notes out on a Delta napkin, or are you on a flight? Where are you flying at back? From fall break?
So many boys.
There's no way I can wait until next week.
There are some dark things and however, there's also President Duterte has quite a few enemies.
We'll teach him abstract algebra. It's a great time.
Yeah, granola bar.
You're right.